security for, all right. I've been in information security for over 20 years, starting back in the days I used to work for NASA up till now. My background includes, doing penetration tests, doing audits, doing PCI audits, doing risk assessments, writing policies, procedures, and whatnot. Pretty much, if there's something with respect to information security controls or information security advice or consulting, I've been there in some shape or form. So, and of course, the ground rules are, if there is anything you want to interrupt me about and talk about, please do, because this time is yours. Actually, this time is yours. So, let's go ahead and talk about the agenda a little bit. So I do come from Lumen, work for Lumen, and we're not going to be talking about what Lumen sells as far as the vendor is concerned. We can talk a little bit about what Lumen does, in that, there's things that we undertake as a research group that we do not charge for, but we do just because we can. We're going to be going through a little bit about the threat landscape afterwards and talking about, where some of the issues have evolved from with respect to bots and botnets, and then go into the trends of the people that do bot herding, onto the responses to that by white hats, and then talk a little bit how, from the history, from the beginning, how this has evolved with bad actors and what they're doing these days, and then we're going to wrap it up with overall observations about what we've talked about. So I'm going to move this over here. All right. Okay. So with respect to botnets, now Lumen as a company, I mean, you can see this picture here. This is our overall picture of our backbone. It's pretty huge, and we're a party to one of the largest raw data sets of any intelligence groups in the world. Pretty much like close to 80% of all the internet traffic crosses our backbone, and when it does, we're privy to all that. But there's something more to this than just having that amount of traffic. You really have to make sense of it. One of the things that kind of resonated with me a long time ago, I was at a webinar with Brian Krebs, and one of the things he said was that story is data with a soul. And that's kind of what we do here. One of the things we do here at Lumen is take this huge amount of data to the tune of like 200 billion flows a day, and we cross-reference it. We have people that are multidisciplined, and they have influence on what kind of decisions are made in terms of what the threat actually is. So the overall end game in terms of dealing with threats in the internet is to understand, one, what the threat is, and two, what the score is. Basically, how valid is it? So in the course of doing that, what we've done is what we do, and I'll go through a couple of examples. Actually, I can go through like maybe a real simple example later on of what I'm talking about. But we take this huge morass of data that's coming to us, and we take these people that have disciplines, years of disciplines in these topics, and then we determine, who's the threat actor, what's the threat type. Basically, for every IP address on the internet, we're keeping a real-time view on what the threat classification is, as well as classification score. So this is just us doing this kind of work in I guess in the end game, after we determine that, and determine an appropriate response to it. And I'll get more into what I mean by that in the next slide. But getting that information is no easy task. I mean, it's not just us. We're not a force of one. I mean, we have several people on our staff as researchers, but the thing is, in addition to the raw data set, we have other people that work with us, that can be pay-as-you-go threat curated threat feeds as well as open source threat feeds. We have our own honeypots out there that we draw information from, as well as other people that are running research groups of their own, and we're all collaborating, sharing information. You know, if I was to make an analogy, this would be like the antivirus consortium, sort of, where, you know, there are people around the world that determine, you know, that can find, do analysis, and share knowledge on viruses that are out there, or different malware that are out there. So, you know, as a community, we would all know about it. Like threat intelligence, it's some of the same thing. And to kind of give you an idea what I mean here, one of the threat intelligence feeds that we use, for instance, is, and to give you an idea, is gray noise. Now, this is a pretty cool thing. Doesn't look like much from the very start, but if I do something like a, if I do a search for malicious, comes up with, it'll come up with a number of what I was talking about, basically. So not only do we have an idea of things that are, you know, where they're coming from, what they're doing, you know, and give you stats in terms of, you know, what kind of threats that they pose against the people that they're coming against. See, this is the kind of information that we use. Now, like I said before, we use our own, but we have 25 or 30 sources just like this that that we take and we glean and we fold that into what we in our day-to-day determination of whether a threat is a threat or not a threat. And one of the things I think is funny is that we're one of the few people, actually this kind of sets us apart from other people, is that, you know, even though someone like Gray Noise or someone like Fish Tank or someone like, you know, or another threat feed tells us that there's a threat out there, we're one of the few out there that don't trust it. So what we'll do is we'll go to our battery of scripts, and we'll actually reach out to someone that's actually running like a C2 botnet, or someone that's I don't know, that's doing one of these threats here, and we'll go out to it. And like any kind of a bad actor, you know, it's kind of like a speakeasy where you have to speak their language. So our scripts basically will engage it. And so long as that bad actor is engaging us, we validated it. And as long as we can keep contact with it, you know, we know that it's 100% a real threat. So basically what we do is we trust but verify. So how many of you guys want to know what's going on in Moscow? No? Yes? I had another example up here, like Fish Tank, for instance, because that's another kind of a threat. Like I said before, we keep a running tally of, you know, what threats are per IP address. And also it goes, and phishing is also another type of attack that actually Fish Tank is one of the sources that we use as well. And knowing this kind of, you know, by reputation of that IP address, knowing that what they're doing also enables us to figure out what you know, what their game is. You know, whether it's the C2, whether they're doing network attacks, whether they're doing phishing, for example. And one of the things that was I remember doing with Lumen back in the day, we were level 3. We had access to this portal that allowed us to determine, well, actually allowed us to see what was going on with these IP addresses that we were looking at. And when we did take a look at these at some customer sites, what we would do is we sit down with them. They give us an IP address. We verify the IP address was theirs, and then we would see what kind of flows were going in and out of that edge device. And so if we see something like phishing is going on, we do some DNS reverse lookups. And then from there, we would figure out, okay, let's go there and see what we can see. And a lot of times what would happen is we would then go out and get an actual snapshot of the image where the people were actually being phished. Okay. And I have another example of that later on, but overall, what we would do is do this kind of research for a company based on our own intelligence, plus, you know, overlapping it on other people's intelligence, basically doing the same thing on site with a customer, showing them, you know, that, you know, what's happening with their user group. Now, When that does occur, it's kind of a shock, of course, because, it's not just Amazon. Sometimes you would see something like O365, or sometimes you would see something like, their banking app, for instance, and their banking app would be slightly misspelled, or the DNS would be poisoned somehow. But in any case, you would be able to show that, one, yes, I am 100% right, and two, here's where the intelligence is true, and this is an actual phishing site. So what this goes down to, when you talk about when you talk about everything that goes into determining whether a bad actor is an IP address is that of a bad actor and what they're doing, all that really does is boil down in the threat intelligence. And where Lumen really gives back to this, and like I said, this is something that we don't charge anyone for. What we do, we go out there and we see this bad activity going on, and we'll shut them down for I think it's around 60 botnets a month. And that doesn't include everything else we're doing too. So what we do as a company, because we have such a huge swath of information, this huge swath of network space, basically our backbone's ubiquitous. We use that, not just for our own business, but also to give back to the customer, give back to the community as well. So we do have an internal research group of our own. It's called Black Lotus Labs. That's what BLL stands for. I was trying to get these. Let me see, where can I put a comment? I was going to go ahead and paste some links to the CyberWire, where one of our directors, he sometimes will step in and he'll talk to the guys at CyberWire about what's going on. But later on, when I figure that, I'll go ahead and post those. I'll go ahead and post those links in there. So moving on to the botnet story in terms of what we see. This is what I was talking about before. Like, for instance, this is misspelling of Amazon. This would be something that I would not commonly, but sometimes would, if I was lucky, be able to get a hold of and show a customer that they're actually being phished. Now, some of the things I was talking about before with respect to the data telling a story, when you first look at these things, and by the way, these right here, this and this, as well as this, are screenshots of our threat intelligence screens. And what you may just look at this and say, this is these are just tabular outputs of things. But if you know how to look at it, it really does tell a story. Okay, like for instance, down here, I took this screenshot, and what I do is I look for, who's the aggressor and who's the victim in this case, and then in taking that information, I can fold in other information like, okay, how are they communicating? And I see things like these destination ports. I see a pair of destination ports that are the same. And if I see other destination ports like these, which mean a lot to me because these are what I would consider ephemeral ports, which means they're not between 0 and 1065. What this means is that this right here originated from the victim, which means he's talking to a bad actor over here on a web service. Okay, so just knowing this much information immediately tells me the story that there's something inside this person's network that's actively engaging a bot herder, a C2 bot herder. And if I also see something with respect to this, and then I also see things with like TCP flags of 24, which tell me that not only is he engaging the bad actor over here, but also this guy could be pushing data, that tells me a bigger story. It further drives home the idea that there's something inside of that network that's talking to that bad actor on a regular basis. And then if I take that story and I trace it back to when it first started, I would bet you that it was started with something like a phishing attack. So commonly what I would find out is before something like this would happen, if the person didn't just go ahead and place their device on the network pre-infected, chances are he'd have gone out to a phishing site first, and then this type of activity would have started. So like I said before, in all cases, the data will tell a story. Okay, so this is the end of my first part. Is there any questions here so far? Cool. So what I guess what I like to do, since I've been around for quite some time, um, when I guess back in the day, late 90s, early thousands, circa 2000 to 2013. I mean, we really didn't know what IoT was, and we would use we would write aggressive scripts to drive things like angry IP or netcat or nmap to figure out what's out there, and we would kind of like stumble past things that could be someone's home automation system, or could be like cameras. But the thing is, we were just doing this using scripts, and we would figure out, based on the ports that were available, 443, 80, if it's a RDP port or if it's a database port, we would know that there's something out there that we could talk to, and we would reach out to it and try to mess with it. And a lot of times breaking into it wasn't that hard, it wasn't that big a deal or that hard, because honestly, when it comes down to it, there are databases of default passwords out there that people would like, that people, when people would set something like that up, they wouldn't bother to change it. So it'd make our jobs even easier just to mess around. And that's kind of all we were doing, was messing around. But nowadays, it's still, this thing is still kind of prevalent, and honestly, one of the things that you should keep in mind is that when botnets harvest machines to be part of a command and control network or be part of some other activity, they're not using zero-day attacks. I mean, if you go back over here to gray noise, for instance, if I look at something like, let's look for Russia or Moscow, see what they're doing. Okay. SSH worm. Let's see. I want to see, let's go back to malicious attacks. I'm going to show you something else. And if I can spell, you could see that, these aren't zero-day attacks, guys. These are just like, we're looking for things that people already know. Eternal blue, this is an SMB attack. This is also an SMB attack. They were looking for things like default passwords, brute force attacks. See right here, like web crawling, telnet brute forcer, SMB crawling, and so on. This is stuff that people use to, just to get into things. And once they do, they can do whatever they need to, depending on the status of the machine. And nowadays, to find these things, it's not really that hard. I mean, nowadays you don't even need to scan. You can do what we call Google dorking, which is, I mean, let's face it, Google knows everything. Google pretty much has indexed everything on the web, and you can tell it to do a number of things. If I want to look for like, camera, you can tell me everything that's out there with a camera. For there's like everything with RDP, everything with RDP open, or something else. If there's something like has to do with control, it'll give me, lines that are active that I can go to, and I can look at things. Like, for instance, if I was to look for things like, somebody, if I actually looked for control one time and I found somebody's home automation system that I could actually get into, or if I was looking for something else, in this case, I was looking for a webcam and I could see what's going on in someone's backyard, or what's going on at somebody's office while he's, on the radio and being a DJ. I mean, the list can go on about things you can do with this thing, and you can look for. This is an actual office space. Sometimes some people's in here, sometimes not. And like this is a perfect example right here. See, no password set. Someone actually got onto this router and said, hey, you need to set a password so people can't get in here, because if you do, they can get down here and start changing things in it, So I guess what I'm saying is that, there's a ton of things you can do with these tools, and they're proof that some of the basic issues that we're running into with respect to making sure that people can't take advantage or improper advantage of IoT, is simply, changing your password, making sure it's not open access. Making sure it's not open access and keeping it patched. So any questions so far before I go on? because I know I'm going to run out of time. So the threat landscape. So let's go back, about the time when I was talking about. Back in the day when we had iPhones, when we had, Androids, they first come out, we used to do things called jailbreaking, right? And the thing is, there were different types of. I did it once or twice, mainly because I wanted to stick it to the man and make my device tetherable. And we used to do things like Cydia. We used to use Cydia, Pangu, Red Snow, Electra, different, whichever did the job that we needed. But the problem was the manufacturer didn't realize that people were out there actually doing that. So that the phone was designed with a default root password, which again presented the same kind of problem that I just showed you guys about how easy things are to access. So using an aggressive script, you can reach out and based on the network, based on the network access that these had, they were easily reachable if you could run an aggressive scan and then find them. And then if you wanted to, and you made your script any smarter, you can absolutely do things like the example I have down here with VPN filter. Now, one of the reasons why I bring up VPN filter is that this is probably one of the most notorious. It's around 2018 this came out. And honestly, to this day, as far as I know, no one really no one's ever figured out a way that the first aspect of the first vector of exploit occurs. But using this type of a paradigm where some things on the network and they're vulnerable to one thing or another based on configuration or based on defaults, they were able to be compromised. And in this case, there's around like 500,000 routers on the internet that were compromised because of this. Now, being compromised, it wasn't so bad. It was just, it was what was engineered into this, okay? For this particular malware VPN filter, this did things like spying on SCADA. This did things like spying on traffic that was going through it. This did things like communicate over the Tor network so you couldn't figure out who it was going back to. It was pretty advanced for the time. And two of the worst things was that this application also had a kill switch. So if it figured out that that device wasn't useful anymore, that malware could go ahead and disable that device altogether. Also, you couldn't get rid of it. The way this was engineered is that if you wanted to get rid of it, you had to pull out the paper clip and hit that deep-seated button on the back for 30 seconds in order to do a factory reset and get rid of it that way. So at this point, what happened was somebody took this aspect or this model of IoT and then determined a very effective way of going across the internet, figuring out what targets were viable, and then engineering it in such a way that not only did they control that device, but also they maintained control of it for as long as they could. So, and you'll find different motivations. Down here, I had a motivation that the motivation was control, but in a lot of cases, you'll find that motivation is going to be monetary. So, also, when you get into when we research things like, for instance, say struts, or I guess what one of the examples I'd like to bring up is the issue that came up with Equifax. Actually, one or two of our guys were helping work on that, and they found that well, in addition to that, and as well as other investigations that we've done, that there were other types of malware that were on these boxes. And one of the things that was a good source of malware was that the person that was propagating its own malware knew sometimes more than we did about who he was competing against. So if you look at this actually what I did, I got this from Fortinet's FortiGuard, and they did a reverse engineering of Gasket. And what you're looking at here is an actual menu of choices that you can make. So if I was a bad guy and I deployed Gasket out there, the agents would heartbeat back to me and say, hey, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to run something in Python for you? Do you want me to scan something? Or do you want me to run some arbitrary code? One of the things I thought was cool, and the reason why we can look into this malware, reverse engineer it, and find out other types of malware, is that it also knows about its competition. So one of the as you can see here, one of the options is, hey, find out who else is on this machine and get rid of them. So sometimes the bad guys will give us information about their own bad people. Okay. Also, there's an issue we have proliferation, not just with respect to people, mismanaging the box, but also the overall, the overall ubiquity or the growing ubiquity of these things. And I think that because of the life niches that these are being applied to, that also gives way to different kinds of attacks that can occur. So like down here, the one I have for home surveillance, there's actually a thing, it's called swatting, where if someone has gotten into the ring central of their house, what they would do is dial 911 and report the neighbor, and then use the camera to stream the police activity that goes on. And I don't know if you guys have been reading about other things, but there was actually a fish tank thermometer that was compromised, and that was used to expand east and west from there. Because let's face it, home surveillance, temperature sensors, controllers at factories, all of these have operating systems. And operating systems, they're not applications, they're operating systems that you can get into and you can compromise based on their configuration and the patch level. So speaking of the ubiquity, it's been, as time goes on, you can tell, because of demand, because of the ease of manufacturing, because of how the advances of technology where you can miniaturize these, you can basically, they're lower cost, they have design improvements. Basically, there's everything there needs to be for IoT to be attractive, because it makes your life easy. Because IoT does a lot of repetitive tasks for you, over and over again, and all it has to do is report back. The ubiquity of these types of devices is going to grow. I mean, no matter what, even after 2020. I mean, it's going to be what, 30.9 billion as of last year. I mean, I don't know what it's going to be for next year, but I'm sure it's going to be higher. But one of the things that is going to expand the threat landscape of IoT, as far as the trend is concerned, is utter ubiquity in different areas. And because they're so cheap and they're so available, that that's one of the reasons that they're going to be expanding. Another thing to consider too is that there are going to be common operating systems that we're going to be using. Like, I mean, a common IoT operating system, maybe for Linux, it'd be like Snappy, Zephyr, Riot, Tizen RT. But the thing is like when you have, 1,000, 5,000, or 10,000 IoT devices that are based on that operating system, if some of the libraries, or maybe it used old libraries to compile when it was released, it may have vulnerabilities associated with it, which then lends itself to a generic vulnerability for that 5,000 or 10,000 IoT devices out there that exist. To make this a step further, take this a step further, when you take this out to 2020 and you look back on things like 2010, I have to ask you something. How long does an operating system last, right? You don't know. I mean, it's what, 5, 7 years? So at this point in time, there may be a mass EOL of IoT devices back here, which then by definition makes them vulnerable because they are not supported anymore. So we may be facing that issue too. Are there any, I've been doing a lot of talking. I'd like to go ahead and stop and see if there's anybody out there that has any questions or would like to raise a point or add to this or I don't know, anything? You guys can still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. I was just wondering if you could continue on beyond 2:30 just to finish all your points, because it's being recorded, just so we can have the full
oh, okay. Okay. So looking at I have got something at 2:30 I have to be on. Okay. So I'm sorry, but if you guys want me to go ahead and I'll just go ahead and wrap up through here. I'll just go over the interesting parts. How about that? Okay. Fair enough? Okay, so this right here, actually, I was in a conference and this was released. This is the Internet Census of 2012. And the cool thing about this, a long time ago, there were a couple of guys that figured it, that thought it was a joke, to see what they could log into with user ID, root, password groups. And to their surprise, they found out that there were hundreds, if not thousands, of machines they could do this with. So what they did was they, in addition to them, they recruited some other individuals to engineer some code where they can, using worm style, they can go ahead and propagate this, right? And what the code basically did was it found those machines, user ID, root, password, root, and it logged in and it would install itself. And using Nmap, using ICMP pings to identify targets, using our reverse DNS and some SYN scans, what it would do is it would take a certain swath of IP address, run those scans, report back, and then propagate and then delete itself. So that was kind of a benign worm back then. It was called the Karna botnet, but it gave us an idea or a picture or a heat map of what was actually out there on the internet. Now, this unknowingly was also concept code where other people took it and they used some of the same types of concepts that could go across huge swaths of IP address and compromise it for their own means. Some were for DDoS. Some had other types of objectives. But one of the things that we found as far as the Botnet Trends is that in 2014, they started writing it in C. Now, it's a rare time when I ever talk to a developer and he says he writes in C. And I used to write in C. I learned from the book of Kernighan and Ritchie. And what I know about C is that if you write something in C, you can compile it for just about anything. And that's exactly why they did this. They had their language written so they can cross-compile and they can run it on MIPS. It didn't matter what kind of an operating system. It didn't matter what kind of a platform it was. It would still run on it, okay? And in addition to that, when you had Linux operating systems, like I was mentioning back then, if you made something kernel independent, again, it would run on any of those as well. So then in 2014, I guess flexibility was introduced. And from then you had people taking Bashlight, Gasket, what have you, or even writing their own from the ground up. They had their own edition. They had their own objectives. Some were DDoS. There was actually Hajime, which was a fixer. It would get on a box and it would fix it. It would actually patch it and then leave. And it's kind of like a burglar breaking into your house and cleaning your bathroom and leaving, right? So then you have in 2017 they had some different ones that would again do some different things, except this one I pointed up, Brickerbot, would actually destroy it would get onto a machine, hit the master boot record and leave. That's pretty much it. But as you go down, you can see that in time that there were additional objectives that people were wanting to accomplish, like for instance, cryptojacking and ransomware. And ransomware these days is getting to be frontline news. It's and these guys are being really, I'd say, really organized about it. Now, Kaiji, I bring up Kaiji in the at the end here, and one thing unique about this, with respect to the development, is that this is actually written in Golang. So this is taken from something as opposed to being written in C. I mean, although Go is syntactically similar to C, we've just started seeing people write malware in that language. So the botnet trends, we're seeing that the bad actors these days are organized. So what you see up here is a snapshot of actually a dark web where DDoS attacks, botnets, exploit kits. Basically, you have crime as a service, or basically DDoS attacks as a service, or ransomware as a service. You have those kinds of things that are being availed to people with a credit card or some kind of cryptocurrency they don't have to be a smart guy. All they have to do is have an intent and some money. And these types of services, believe it or not, just like Google, are rated, and people with nefarious intent, they can go into these sites, and not only can they use these kinds of services, but also it comes with support, email support. It also comes with training. So hacker tutorials, $50. Believe it or not, this goes all the way down to things like if you wanted to go ahead and buy points for an airline or buy points for another type of a rewards program like Hertz or National or something like that. All that stuff's in there, even passports. So with respect to what's available out there, it's more than just malware. They also it spans the gamut of pretty much what you can buy. So with respect to botnets, we know that you can you go into things like temperature sensors. You can go into like I showed you before, the fish tank thermometers and so on. And using those, you can exploit those. Now, just to get a little bit of audience participation here, what other things can you think of that are that could lend itself? What kind of IoT devices out there can you think of that can lend itself to an attacker? Now, I already showed you thermostat, and I already showed you lighting. In the refrigerator, that's a given, so that's a gimme. Can anyone give me one example? Come on, you can do it.
Your cable box.
Yep. I had a guy came on and he said cars, and I had to think about that, and I did read something about somebody over Bluetooth getting their brakes disabled, or basically anything that allows RF interface from one point to another, or a network interface that you can talk to, or that controls something. Yeah, you can. It's going to be vulnerable. It can be vulnerable as an IoT device for compromise and control, basically.
I think that's bluejacking.
That is bluejacking, yes. So white hat trends, some of the white hat trends that we have that occur because of this, they're actual frameworks that are out there that have been developed to test IoT devices. What can basically what we do is what these are used for. They have an embedded framework, or they have an embedded syntax for the framework that could reach out to routers, to other types of IoT devices to do things like test SSH keys, basically try to break in by using default passwords, looking at patch levels and banners they're getting back from services and such. Basically, what this is all boiling down to is that the white hat community is responding to this with tools that can help us, shore up against these kinds of issues. Also, from the assessment side. In fact, this is late news. Just the other week, NIST came out with a publication. It's a preliminary draft of ransomware readiness. And what this is it's like I think like 40 to 60 pages of not steps, but items, requirements, the things you can validate against with snippets from other standards, whether they be ISO or HIPAA or other standards. They have references to those in there. But basically, where this has to be combated is not just with respect to testing and making sure your updates are there and harden it, but there's also a management aspect of this as well, because let's face it, if they can't get in from the front end, they're going to get in by phishing and then controlling things from within the network. Okay, so this is probably the last slide I'll have here, and I'll go ahead and stop at this point. But the last of the bad actor trends, like I showed you before, ransomware and other IoT compromised methods are available on, like you can buy these on websites basically. And aside, regardless of the objective of the ransomware itself, basically this is being organized, and this is organized in a ransomware as a service. And they also have what we call affiliate programs, where if you're not just a person going to a bad actor to help you set up a C2net or or DDoS net, if you are somebody that is willing to distribute work a ransomware engagement, the people that actually own that code are the people that get like 10% or 15% off the top if that's successful. Not only that, realize also that there are people out there, and I don't know what articles you've been reading or what podcasts you listen to, but I've been hearing that they have their own consultants. That's consultants that go out and they'll take a look at companies, and based on their solvency, they'll come back and say, this company is worth compromising. This company has this much money. And if you are successful at compromising them, then you can ask for this much money in return. And not only will that consultant identify these targets for you, but he will also do things like he'll be the negotiator between the bad guy and the insurance company, chances are, that's paying the ransom. So if you look at the Colonial Pipeline attack, that there's something that occurred there I thought was doggone near miraculous, which was somehow the company got most of their Bitcoin back, right? And and I heard a story about how this happened, which is you really can't do that. I mean, that's impossible. You can't get Bitcoin back from somebody unless you have the wallet's private key. And what happened in this case was that the private key was actually embedded in the malware itself. So when it was reverse engineered, the guys that did it were able to reach out to that crypto wallet and pull that currency back to them. Now, why didn't they get all of it? That's because the ransomware people that were fronting them, they got their 10% and left. And the people that were actually doing the attack weren't fast enough to move on. So the FBI were able to reach out there and get that money back from them. So anyway, I guess with that story, I guess what I'll do is I'll go ahead and stop right now. Like I said, I have a meeting that's I'm 4 minutes late for. And this is a good stopping point. Guys, I enjoyed